Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sales Clinic. I'm Storm. This is Matt, and it's great to have you all back here for our second episode. Matt, thanks for coming. How's things?
Things are good, Storm. Thank you for asking. Yeah, it's been a busy
Good.
couple of weeks. Enjoyed our last conversation 2 weeks ago. As you can see, I'm in my dad's apartment at the moment, so slightly different background to what I had before. But no, I'm good. How about yourself?
Yeah, good. It's been an interesting couple of weeks. I've got some big questions for you, but also if the grand people out there have questions about sales, Matt, as ever, is in the hot seat, and I will pitch in where I can. So pop your questions in the chat, and we will answer them as we go along. I wanted to get us started because summertime is coming. I feel very
Yep.
Game of Thrones about this, and I know that Game of Thrones isn't cool anymore. But summer is coming in the same way that winter is coming, and everyone winds down. I'm thinking, fuck it, I get a month off. But the sort of panic says, don't take a month off. And in the 3 years of doing this, I've never taken August off. That's not a point of pride, it's a point of panic. What do you think people should be doing to keep sales going throughout August when people aren't at their desks?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So when I was a seller myself, when I was sales director leading teams, even in the corporate world, August, particularly in Europe, so we had a lot of business in France, as you may or may not know, that completely shuts down for the whole of August. And even then, I would get a bit angsty about it, a bit nervous. Oh, it's really quiet. But I suppose you've got to just realize there's nothing you can do. And that's just the way it is. In terms of what I would do, I think outreach would probably not be the best idea because no one's going to answer their emails or their LinkedIn messages. And if they do, when they get back, you're going to be in a pile of hundreds of other emails and LinkedIn messages. So I wouldn't necessarily bother doing that. What I used to say to my sales team at downtimes at Christmas and summer was, this is your opportunity to understand a bit more about your industry, understand a bit more about your key customers, checking financial reports, checking Google to see what their C-suite are saying, what their strategies are, what they're looking to do, what are some of the challenges in the industry. Is there any legal things coming through the pipeline that might impact the industry and your customers? So that's a good chance to do some homework there. And I think more sort of for our size businesses, Storm, I don't know what your take is, but maybe looking at processes internally. What can we do more efficiently? We've got some downtime, we've got some breathing space and some capacity. Is there things we can automate? I know my CRM, there's still a lot of manual processes that I follow, which is completely against everything that I've stood for 20 years. And we sold a lot of tools that automated stuff. So maybe this is a really good chance for myself to practice what I preach and look at, making things more efficient while I've got that capacity. What are your thoughts?
I am the god of inefficiency.
I find
And
that very hard to believe.
Really
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, when it comes to our process, the things we do for our clients is really nailed down. But when it comes to us in terms of sales, it's not great. But my approach to this is slightly different to yours, in that we use this time for brand building. So we've got these ads coming out. And this is going to look crap on camera, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. So this one says, "Are you a sadist, or do you like when the competition beats you?" And that ad is going to be running for 2 weeks through the summer through the Glasgow subway. Now, the subway is great for us because obviously, if you're not in Glasgow, you won't know this, but it's not as complicated as what you've got down in London. There's like a dozen stops, and it's just a circle underneath the Clyde. So we've managed to buy a bunch of these stations, so people will get on the subway and they'll see our ad. They'll hoon around it. They'll get off and they'll see our ad again. And we like the subway because more professionals tend to take it than things like buses. Text-heavy ads don't work on like billboards on the side of highways, motorways, that sort of thing, right? So for us, it's how do we create as much brand building as possible and leaning into, and I can't believe I'm saying this, Matt, because I think I've ranted to you privately about LinkedIn, but leaning into LinkedIn advertising and working on the assumption that people treat LinkedIn like it's any other social network, and they will be checking it during the summer. So they'll be seeing our sponsored posts. And then when they come back in September, October, if they're ready to buy, they'll think of Sober.
Yeah, interesting. Couple of questions for you.
Oh, God.
Firstly, Yeah, well, just talk to me a little bit about that campaign. So interesting to know what that's about. And a question I have for you is, how do you track and measure the success or not of that campaign? Is there any way of doing that? And if so, what are the metrics you use?
Yeah, okay, big questions. The point of the campaign is fame, right? So the more famous that you are, the more opportunities that you get. So this is just kind of like a simple fundamental. So fame is worth spending money on. So this is where we look at it. You can generally talk about marketing, and this is more of a marketing than a sales thing, but you can generally look at marketing in two ways, right? The long of it and the short of it. The long being your long-term brand building, so people think about you in, say, 5 years, and the short being getting people to buy from you immediately, the stuff that keeps the lights on. Our focus is very much on the long at the moment. So we want to build that fame up. We want to build up that idea of, people thinking, oh, my positioning's crap. What do I do? Oh, sober. We want them, we want to flood the market to the point where they're not even thinking about our competitors. Luckily for us, most professional services companies, most agencies, all of our competitors don't do out-of-home advertising. It's all LinkedIn posting and LinkedIn content. So this gives us a really distinct advantage. In terms of measuring it, this is going to be controversial, but we don't. And the reason for that is some things don't need to be tracked down to the penny or the pound. There are some things that just make sense. There's a really good example of this. AO, they deliver washing machines and all that kind of stuff. They have a box of green branded teddy bears in their vans. And if they turn up to a house with children, each child gets a teddy bear. They don't know, they know what that costs them because they know how much that they spend on teddy bears, but they don't know what the return is on that. And how often do you buy a new washing machine, right? But some things are just worth doing. And when it comes to out of home, I'm sure a more sophisticated agency like M&C Saatchi could do that down to the penny. But for us, it's just worth doing. It just makes sense.
Well, interestingly, before we jumped on this call, you said you had tried it before on bus stops and that hadn't been successful. So
Yeah,
batting it back to you, how did you know that that wasn't successful?
that was egg on my face. That was purely a targeting issue. So the first creative that we ran was choice words won't make your bus come faster, but they will speed up your sales. And we had purchased the bus shelters again for a 2-week cycle around the Glasgow city centre. So you could walk down a number of streets and you could see them all in a row. So you're getting a lot of like impressions, right? But what we didn't think about at the time, as embarrassing as it is to say, although there's an example that I can talk about with a much bigger brand as well, is our target market is £1 million plus professional services. And those people are not catching the bus from place to place, town to town, right? What we should have done was buy either Subway, where we know that those people skip from meeting to meeting because it's faster and more efficient, or by the inside advertising panels of black cabs, because again, we know that those people are ABC1, right?
Yeah.
So that was purely just a targeting mistake but it was an expensive lesson. But you've got to learn these things somehow, right? And I think it's better we learn it ourselves than pitch it to a client and waste their money on it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. An expensive learning curve, but an important one.
I think all of the learning curves are expensive when you're in business, Matt.
I'm finding that out, Storm, absolutely.
That's one thing. I know we talked about this last week, but you were mentioning, and you've seen some posts about, you've done some posts rather recently around like when people lose deals. And you often talk about how they didn't lose the deal at the end, they lost it at the beginning. Can you expand on that a little bit for me and just tell me about like what people should be thinking about coming into the summer?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was an interesting post on LinkedIn yesterday that I shared to my network, and I can't remember the guy, so apologies, but basically talking about, there was two images, one of a salesman, the trope of a salesman, shiny suit, whatever, who does a lot of talking, and the numbers were, the more you talk, the less sales, and there was some stats supporting it. And there was a guy who was just listening, and again, the stats were saying, well, the more you listen, the more successful you are as a salesperson. And the reason why I mentioned that is because there's also that's a trope of salespeople, right? Yeah, the more they talk, they got to be gifted the gab, as we say in England. They got to be extroverted. They've got to be suave and sophisticated. And one of the other tropes is it's all about closing. So I don't know if I mentioned it last week, but there's a famous film called Glengarry Glen Ross, which has got Al Pacino and some other great actors in it. And it's about sales and leads and stuff like that. And the one of the main guys, and he's really famous, and I can't remember his name, but he refuses to give coffee to one of the guys in the film because he hadn't been closing, and he said coffee is for closers. And that's that real trope about it's all about closing, having closing techniques, and how do you close and all this sort of stuff, which actually, in my experience, is a complete opposite. How your deal closes is absolutely related to how you open that deal. So making sure that you're at the very beginning, you're mapping out the organization, understanding who the key decision makers are, validating who they are. So a post I put on this week was around that example we talked about last week, where I lost the deal twice because I hadn't validated the champion, and I was trusting everything he was telling me, but actually in hindsight he wasn't that person that I thought he was. So validating everything that that person or people are saying to you, as I said, building out the decision making organization, making sure you've got a roadmap that they've bought into in terms of, right, these are the key milestones, including legal, procurement, whatever else there might be, having that mapped out. And once you've got the basis of that mapped out and you're happy with what you got to do, what the commitments are from you and from the buyer, because they need to show commitment. If you're giving everything and they're giving you nothing, again, that's a red flag for me. But yeah, mapping that out, and then once you've got all those, got that mapped out, is then having those right conversations and digging down to the pain, getting them to use their language, getting them to measure it. So talking about, how do you measure the success of your campaigns on the Glasgow Tube or Metro, whatever it's called? Well, what I preach is you always need to measure. It's all about the metrics. Find out what metrics are important to your buyer. Get them to tell you what the risks are, what the problems are, and how they can measure return on investment. That's really important. But yeah, once you've got that mapped out, in theory, and you're doing all the right things, a close should really just be a full stop on that whole process.
I see. I got you. So a lot of those things. I mean, I'm thinking of Suits right now, which is one of my favorite TV shows. But they always talk about how Harvey Specter's like the best closer in the city. I guess what you're describing is that there's no, but if you follow the sort of Matt Earle process, the selling collective process, there's no objections when you get to close. But what we see in TV a lot is objection, 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 convincing them miraculously at the 11th hour, which I guess is more exciting to watch than a deal with no issues, right?
Yeah, and what I'm saying is it's not going to be a magic process by, if you're doing this up front, there will never be any objections. There's always going to be objections, but what you want to do is understand what those objections are or could be early on, so you can plan. Because what you don't want to do is get to right at the end and you're getting objections thrown at you that you had no idea were coming. You don't know where they've come from, why they've been raised, why is this important to you. The sooner you can map those out, the sooner you can address them, mitigate those and handle those objections. So if they do come from procurement, hey, what about this? You've got the answer beforehand. You've spoken to the relevant people. They've said this might be an objection, or this is an objection to the business. You've addressed that. You've shown why that shouldn't be an objection. So one of the classic ones is late stage price objection. So if you haven't mapped out the problem you're trying to solve and the metrics and the money or whatever metric is that's the problem, or how that problem manifests itself, if you haven't mapped that out early enough, when you get to the end of the sales cycle, you will get like late price objections because you haven't been able to quantify what the problem is. If you have done that properly, when they say, right, well, hang on a minute, we don't want to spend X, you can then show them, well, actually, there's a clear business case here because I've done all that work. I know the problem to you is a £10 million problem, and we're charging you £500,000. Clearly there's a return on investment here. So if you've done all that throughout that process, when those price objections come up, generally through procurement with big corporates, you've got a clear objective business case where you can clearly say, well, this there isn't a price objection here because the return on investment is going to be to the power of X, Y, Z.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. I just want to remind people as well that while they're watching, throw questions in the chat if they've got any. One of the questions as well that I have for you, Matt, a lot of the people that we talk to, both as clients, both as our peers in the industry, and I think for both of us are people that run those kind of £1 million professional services or agencies companies. Now, what we know about them is that a lot of them build their businesses on referrals, right? Nothing wrong with referrals, but they do only take you so far. And I think generally what that means is if they're doing founder-led referrals, then the founder or the CEO is out making those connections, bringing in the new business. They generally don't have like a salesperson or a sales plan. If they want to take that 1 million and say turn it into 10 or 100, what's the easiest way to get started with building a sales plan and getting salespeople on board?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, funnily enough, I was meeting with a guy last week who has been running his own business for, I think he said 5 or 7 years, and as you said, it has been through referrals. So, ex-clients won some work, or ex-colleagues won some work. Off the back of that, one more work, but he's now got to the point where the pipeline is running a bit dry, and he needs to look at scaling and moving beyond that. And I'm sure you do this. I don't always practice what I preach, and he's a guy who's got a sales background. And when I spoke to him a few months ago, he was like, "Yeah, well, I'm a seasoned salesperson. I know I don't need help. Blah blah blah." And I think he sort of realised actually he's taken the eye off the ball. So I sat down with him last week and I was just asking him some, maybe not simple questions, but questions around strategy. What's your positioning? Who are you going after? What are the problems you're trying to solve? What would your existing customers say about you? And he was like, "Oh, I don't actually know." So it was quite good for him to realize there was stuff that he didn't know that he needed to find out. So yeah, to answer your question, the first thing I've done with him and others is, okay, well, let's strip it right back to the very beginning. Let's build out a simple sales strategy. And one of the first things I learned, Storm, was coming from a corporate background. Our sales strategies would be 20, 30, 40 pages long. And one of my first customers, I built him something very similar. I spent hours on it, and I don't think he read any of it because it's just like so overwhelming. So it's stripping that back to some very clear, actionable actions, if that makes any sense. Some times around them, some responsibilities, and just having some simple things to follow. So for month 1, okay, what is your positioning? Can you find out the problem you're solving, and what does that look like to your prospects in terms of risk, pounds being lost, market share being lost? What do your existing customers like about you? If I was to interview them, what would they say about you? Why did they choose you? Why do they work with you? All those sorts of things, building up that foundation. Then month 2, it's about, okay, right, how are we going to engage with those businesses? What channels should we use? Is it LinkedIn? Is it events? Is it other things? Where do they play? And then what's the cadence for reaching out to them? What are the checkpoints for, okay, well, this hasn't worked or this is working. What do we do more of? What do we do less of? So building out a fairly simple plan over the next 3 to 6 months, and then finishing that, and then retrospectively looking back and saying, okay, well, that worked well, that didn't work well, etc. So that would be the first thing, is if you haven't got those key fundamentals in place, you can be working 12 hours a day, you can be doing everything, but if you haven't got those key fundamentals, what are we doing and why, then everything else is going to fall apart.
That's so interesting because we obviously do the first part of what you talked about, right? Getting people to work out what their positioning is. And this isn't exclusive just for the sales clinic, but we're working on a report at the moment that pulls together the most common overused words in B2B, specifically looking at professional services. And this column that we've got on the report says, cutting edge, groundbreaking, all those kinds of things. And you really can play mix and match with any of those words and put them against any business and be none the wiser. And this is something we say to people all the time, like they're not going to buy from you if they don't know why they should choose you over someone else. We have a question here from Chris Bailey. How do you start building a sales team?
Oh, that's a very good question. I suppose, again, at the risk of repeating myself, in a sales strategy or a sales plan, not only will you have the positioning, who we're going after and why, you will also then have that execution plan. And that execution plan will have, okay, well, how am I going to execute this? Is it territory? Is it type of salesperson, type of persona? Is it going to be more account management, or is it more going after new business? And then you can map out what you need to execute on that plan. And then that will give you, right, okay, I need a new business person here, or I need an account management here. So that's the very sort of basics of it. In terms of hiring the right people, if that's a question as well.
Yeah, let's tuck into that. Who's the first person you should hire?
I always find that attitude is more important, and this will differ in different industries, but attitude is more important than knowledge and experience. So obviously, again, that very industry dependent, but some of the best hires I've had are those ones who are just really excited, full of energy, willing to learn, open to new ideas. You'll always come across those ones who've been in industry for a long time, who are stuck in their ways, and they'll always bring you numbers. But it's more about, how do you scale, how do you use those resources to bring the level up of the whole team. So somebody who's been doing it for years and who might hit his or her targets every year, brilliant. But what's their impact on the rest of the team? Do you want somebody who's willing to learn, who will raise that level, be infectious? You can bounce ideas off them. They might challenge you as well. What you don't want is somebody just sitting there nodding. You want somebody to challenge you as well. So yeah, that would be my advice. But as I said, sometimes if the industries are very technical, you do need somebody to have that sort of background. But we always struggled with, do we go with somebody who really understands the industry and the technology that we're selling, and perhaps don't have the sales experience or the sales gumption? Or do we go the other way around and go somebody who's really good at sales but perhaps doesn't have that technical experience? And to be honest, I never really found there was a magic bullet. I would probably more veer to the sales skills and the attitude rather than the technical experience at the expense of that sales attitude and that sales experience.
I want to keep on this question just for a couple more minutes, if you don't mind. And that's just by following up and saying, do you have core questions that you ask salespeople when you're hiring them to know if they're going to be good for you and your team? Like, do you have like 3 maybe, or just 2?
Oh, that's another good question. You put me on the spot there. No, I don't think I could come up with 3 questions that I would immediately ask. I suppose I would ask them questions around how they would handle an initial conversation. So how you frame and set up your initial conversations with prospects is really important. So there's a stat out there, I think it's like 70 or 80% of first calls end in failure. So making sure you get those right is really important. So I would probably ask them, what are the first few questions that you would ask somebody in that scenario? And that would be very telling, because it's all about open-ended questions. So building some rapport, yes, but then open-ended questions, and those open-ended questions could apply to any situation. So, tell me about your sales process, or tell me about your order process, or tell me about your reconciliation process. Those open-ended questions are really good, because then the person you're speaking to will start naturally going down those avenues where there are problems or issues or things at the top of his mind. So yeah, I would ask some questions like, what would be your first question you'd ask in a situation? Or if you were speaking to somebody, or if you had a champion in a business and you weren't really getting access to power, what would you do? So some of those sort of more basic, maybe not basic, but some of those sales questions and techniques that inquisitive, empathetic people would ask. You could probably pick out people who have read all the books, but perhaps don't quite, understand the reality of the situation. So yeah, I realize I haven't given you 3 questions, but that's the approach I would take.
I mean, I like the approach, and I think the more that you and I talk, and we obviously talk outside of this show as well, the more I just want to hire you to take over all of my sales. So if you're happy working for cat biscuits and some loose buttons that I've got in my trouser pockets, I think we should have a conversation. Thomas Naylor has asked, how do you get marketing and sales teams to work closer together in B2B tech marketing? Now, I've done this. So I'm going to take a sort of swing at this, and it will be somewhat ironic if we have hugely diverging answers, but worth going through. And the way that we've always done this, and it sounds so dumb, right? But it's just by having those weekly sales and marketing calls, making sure that sales understand what marketing can do and what marketing is capable of, and also marketing making sure that sales can understand. So where do you each fit in the pipeline? I think part of the bigger context of this question is about, marketing specifically not knowing or not being able to really talk about where and how it fits into an organization. So we talk a lot about how, your CMO should have a seat at the executive table, right? Like you need to share business critical information with your marketing team. Businesses should do two things, right? Be innovative and invest in marketing. A lot of those conversations aren't happening. But what we do see, and what I saw in my corporate life, is that the sales director will have a seat at that table. And so often your sales director is kind of dominating your marketing director, which leads to all kinds of fraught things. So I think for broader context, make sure that your CMO has a seat at the table. Make sure that they really understand what marketing can do. I think then, make sure that your CMO and your sales director or your head of sales, the equivalent, are aligned on like, what are the goals here? What are we? Because often I think salespeople say, oh, we just need more leads. And marketing's like, well, we've given you leads. And they're like, well, those leads are shit. And it's like, so like figure that out, right? Figure out what's a good MQL, what's a good SQL, have those tough conversations. And I think also just like talk to each other. Don't live in a silo. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that. I kind of want you to disagree with me just because it would make for great TV.
Yeah, so I think the first point, as you were saying, that the CMO must have a seat at the table. Funnily enough, I've seen the opposite where the CMO has had a seat at the table, but there hasn't been a senior sales voice at that table. So I have seen it the other way. Again, at the risk of repeating myself, it comes back to having a clear strategy in place for the business. So you made a good point. Everyone should know where they fit in that strategy, even down to, the guy cleaning out the bins or whatever. Everyone needs to understand where they fit in the strategy and how they're going to hit their strategic objectives. So again, when I talk about sales strategies that I've built myself, there will always be a marketing element to that. Where it shows, right, this is what I need from marketing. Now I've built that in conjunction with the CMO, so it hasn't been me, but we've worked together to do that.
You have.
So that the marketing people can also see, right, well, Matt and his team has these objectives, these are the targets, this is what we need to do to help him get that. So I think having that strategy in place where everyone knows what they're doing is really important. But also there's a cultural element as well. So in a dysfunctional business, you will always see marketing and sales do that. Sales, as you said, these leads are crap, or marketing, we've given you great leads, you're not following up. And I've heard that last week. Do two different sides of the fence from two different people. So that's an ongoing thing where there's a culture that isn't quite working. But what I used to do was I was very, very heavily invested in spending time with my marketing team and the product team. So I had a really good relationship with our head of product, and I had a really good relationship with our CMO, and I made sure that we had regular meetings with myself, my team, with the marketing team, with the product team, where we could get together and we could say, right, this is what we're doing, this isn't working very well, this is where we need you to support. Marketing come say, right, this is our roadmap for the year, this is what we're doing, how can we help you, where can we plug in things that we can build for you? And then product would do something very similar. So again, we would feel that we're all on the same team. But there will be businesses where that culture is not there. There might be personality clashes, whatever it might be, that might not allow for that. But I think if you're a senior sales or marketing or product person, that is something you've really got to pull together is have those weekly, maybe not weekly, but regular monthly catch-ups where you can share, and warts and all, I would never be too proud to say, well, this hasn't worked, or that, this is what we're doing, this isn't working, or this is working, and just get that sense of we're all pulling in the same direction, and what can we do to help you.
Nice. We got a great question here from Tom Woodford. That is, it seems like people conflate marketing and sales, but they seem like different skill sets that you potentially don't find in one person. It's actually two questions. Do you need a marketing hire to define your message before you build out the sales team? So the answer to both of your questions, Tom, the very short answer is yes. People often conflate sales and marketing. They are two very different things. It's extremely reductive of me to say this, but marketing is as much about selling stuff as sales is. And the point of your marketing should be to make people want to buy the thing, whatever that thing is. Then your salespeople should, and again, I'm being reductive, just rock up and sign the check and take the commission. A big part of marketing is your brand building, your brand awareness. So making sure that people think about you, they know about you. We've got to remember that in B2B, 95% of the market isn't in buying mode at any given time. So if we think, okay, well, there's only 5%, marketing's job is to make sure that 95% think of you when they are ready to buy. So that's your brand building, that's your share of voice, that's your share of market. That's making sure that you've got strong messaging, that's your advertising, all of that stuff. You can't ask one person to understand that, to do all of that. This is insanity, and yet a lot of businesses do it. And then, so the second part, the answer, and I will get your take on this, Matt, is you should have a marketing partner or a marketing hire define your positioning and your messaging. There's no reason you can't do that in conjunction with sales. I'm biased here, and I would say that the best thing you can do is get an outside partner to define your messaging and your positioning, because an outside partner or an agency, such as ourselves, isn't as invested in the emotional sort of like baggage that a company carries. And so they're quite often able to cut through the bullshit a bit more, challenge the decisions a bit more. And they don't have to kind of worry about losing their job. There's a lot of like covering your own ass in corporate. And I think that often means that people are scared to really push the limits of a message. Your take, Matt?
Yeah, so I would agree that they're two very different roles. Sales is, again, I'm biased here, but I think it's one of the most difficult jobs, if not the most difficult job. And I'm not saying marketing. I'm not saying marketing isn't, but I started off as a developer 25 years ago, and the stresses and the pressures are very different. But I'm going on a bit of a tangent there. But yeah, I would say they're absolutely two very different. I mean, I even think account management and new business are two very different roles to me. So, in terms, and Storm, I agree with you. I think in an ideal world, you would have an external party come and have a look with fresh eyes on what you're doing, how you're positioning yourself, what the problem is you're trying to solve, what are your customers really concerned about. Absolutely. But I think there are things that small businesses or businesses can do themselves by looking at, stripping back to basics. Really, what are we trying to do here? The what and the why and the how, those sort of simple questions a lot of businesses don't actually do. They're so stuck in the weeds, they're so busy serving their customers, they don't take that step back. But yeah, I would agree with you. In an ideal world, you would have an expert like yourselves do that positioning and the framing and all that brilliant sort of stuff.
I think also, when you talk about businesses being like in the weeds, a lot of the time what we find with companies that we work with is they've just never had to think about the things that we've talked about today, because their referral pipelines and their networks have been so strong that it's not until those dry up they go, oh fuck, we don't know what to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so new business is the lifeblood of any business, and as you said, you don't really need to think about that too much until you get to that point where you've exhausted your your warm network, and then it's right. Why is this not working? Well, it's because you're not speaking the right language. You're not appealing to the right things. You're not, touching on the right subjects or pain points or whatever, which hasn't been necessarily an issue up until this point.
I want to talk to you a little bit about build it and they will come, because I think that this might have used to have been true, maybe. It's certainly not true anymore, right? People talk about, I mean, you look at AI, and I don't want to be the guy, I don't want to be going on about AI, right? But like, there are so many AI consultants and so many AI businesses that the idea of build it and they will come for AI has just been blown straight out of the water. So you need to be different. We have a take on that. Obviously, that's kind of our jobs to have a take on it. But for you, from a sales perspective, if build it and they will come doesn't exist, what can people do from a sales perspective to make sure that they're keeping, I don't want to say keeping the lights on, I want to say going from a mil to 5 mil or 5 mil to 10 mil?
So following should say that I had a conversation with a company a little while ago that was looking to build something. So maybe not quite the 1 to 5 mil that we're talking about, but they were at the beginning of their journey. And I was asking this person some questions about the industry, the language they use, what concerns them, and he didn't, and he was honest, he didn't have the answers. So my first recommendation was, right, well, go to some of these businesses and actually ask some of those questions. Just, what is the language? If this problem arises, what does that mean to you as an individual? And getting up that profile, the language they use, the problems they're concerned about. Because you're right, build it and they will come. That's unless you're stupidly lucky or you fall across, you come across an amazing idea, that's not really going to work. But you're going to need to make sure that you are solving a problem that concerns people. As I said to you before, 80% of B2B buying decisions are based on solving a specific problem. So if you aren't solving a specific problem, or you don't appear to be solving a specific problem, whatever you build is not going to work. So yeah, and again, if you're a business that's got to a certain level, you've exhausted your warm network and you want to go to that next level, very similar advice really is making sure you're speaking the right language, you're appealing to the right problems, you understand what they look like, and how they manifest themselves in particular businesses you're trying to target. And again, it goes back to your strategy. Who are you going after? Why are you going after them? How are you going to do it? What's the messaging? What's the problems? All those sorts of things. If you build out that ideal customer profile and an action plan off the back of that, then it becomes a lot easier because it's clear in your head. And I think, as you said at the beginning, Storm, is if you can't explain your business within X number of sentences, then how are your customers going to understand that?
Yeah, and it's funny actually. There's something that we always say is, if your mum can understand what you do, then you talk about it in the right way, which is something I picked up from journalism school. Except there they called it, there was the Homer Simpson test. And it was like, if Homer Simpson can understand this, you've done a good job. The only thing I would add to what you said is reminding people, remembering that people buy emotionally and they justify rationally.
Yeah.
And this is true across all purchases. I mean, anything you've ever bought is an emotional purchase, which is kind of funny because I knew that I was doing this last night when I was buying new parts for my vacuum cleaner. So predictably, I have a Henry pet, right? Because I have a very hairy, very shaggy dog. And the hose pipe is busted on it. And there was a brand that supposedly, according to the Amazon reviews and the write-up, exactly fit the Henry pet, but was like off market. And it was about £6 cheaper than the official merchandise. And I upsold myself £6 to get the official one because emotionally I felt more safe getting a branded thing than having to fuck about with, oh, I've got this wrong thing. And it's a very, very small example, but people do this in B2B buying and in big contracts all the time, right? The safer you can make someone feel, the more heard rather you can make someone feel, the more emotionally invested they're going to be in buying that thing from you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I work with salespeople, I say that your biggest competitor is not one of your competitors or another vendor, it's no decision, because somebody sees the risk of doing something or making a change bigger than the risk of doing nothing. So with your Henry the Hoover example, you deemed it more risky to not pay that £6 and have something that doesn't work than shelling out the extra £6 and going. So that's a classic example of risk, the avoidance of risk in a B2B, B2C buying decision.
Which I would say everyone on that's watching this should read Alchemy by Rory Stewart. Now, I said Rory Stewart, I meant Rory Sutherland. Rory Stewart's the politician. I always get them confused. Two very thoughtful men, but very different sides of the world. Alchemy by Rory Sutherland. Rory is obviously, and I don't begrudge him this at all, the mascot for Ogilvy, right? This is his job, is to go around and talk about these kinds of things. But what's really great about Alchemy is he talks a lot in that book about what you've just said, that weighing up of risk and where people see risk and how they feel about it. And what's great about the book specifically is there are real life examples and there are sort of corporate examples, and you get to put them together as a reader. So an example of a real life one is he talks about driving past a cafe, and if the cafe's got really tired, rickety furniture, you're automatically thinking that's probably not a good cafe. But if they've got nice furniture, you're more likely to go there. So you already have that built-in perception before you arrive, right? And a lot of this is about brand, and a lot of brand work is mitigating that risk, that emotional risk, which is something that we talk to people about with positioning. But I just think, people should get on it, understand the sort of emotional role that also the role that emotions play in sales.
Following a complete tangent here, but we were talking about music, weren't we, before we came online?
Yeah.
And there's a famous story, I think it was Van Halen, that they always said on their rider, we want a bowl of M&Ms, but there can't be any brown ones in there or blue ones or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone took that as a sign of them being up their own whatever, or being a divas. But actually, I think Eddie Van Halen said, no, it's because we have a lot of pyrotechnics on stage. And if they're not looking at the finer details and getting things right, like the M&Ms, they're not going to get the pyrotechnics right, and it might blow up in my face. If I go and see a bowl of M&Ms and there are brown ones in there, I'm probably thinking, well, you haven't done those pyrotechnics safely enough. And just talking about when you go past a cafe and you see a rickety chair, that just sort of sprung into my mind.
That's interesting. Slipknot were the converse, where they just used to set Corey Taylor on fire. But now we've gone way off. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Matt, I feel like we've saved the world from bad sales. But obviously, if you are struggling with your sales, give Matt a call and he will fix them, because that's what he does.
Cool.
Shameless plug.
Well, and same for you, Storm. I mean, you are the expert when it comes to marketing and positioning. So if anyone's got any issues or challenges around that, make sure you give Storm a buzz.
We will be back in 2 weeks. We'll see you then. Thanks so much.
Cool. Thanks, Storm.